Hey everybody, welcome back to Retro Modding News, my weekly video where I talk about what's new and upcoming in the world of retro console modding. This week's video is sponsored by PCBWay, but more on PCBWay later. First up this week, I received two new NES power boards from Merlin Shaw. These replacement NES power boards are useful if, let's say, you have some leaky capacitors in the RF module for an NES. You can replace that whole board with a new power unit. Now they sent me two different versions. The one on the left here is composite only for a stock console, and the one on the right is for using with an NES RGB. I don't think there's anything notable on this composite only version. However, I do want to mention that Merlin Shaw sent me, it's gotta be maybe a year and a half ago, he sent me an earlier revision of this composite only power board, and it semi-recently stopped working. So this is an updated revision of that. Hopefully I'm going to get around to swapping out that one from my OpenTendo build, that's the one that has the Merlin Shaw board, and putting this new version in there and testing it out. However, this other power board is more interesting. So like I said, it's designed to work with the NES RGB. You can actually see these like JST connector right here that has breakouts for RGB, composite video, etc. that goes to the NES RGB board. And then that breaks out the signal to go into this Genesis 2 style DIN port. So you'd have to use Genesis 2 style cables, either SCART or the component cables, to get this to work. It has an integrated palette select switch here, which I'm not sure how well this is going to work with the NES RGB 4.0, the new version of the NES RGB. I think it has built-in IGR, which allows you to select the palettes. So I don't necessarily think this will be useful for the newest version of the NES RGB. But another thing is it has this interesting audio switch, and it has two different options, either internal audio or external audio. I'm assuming that's the difference between internal audio coming straight from the CPU versus like something that has the expansion audio enabled if you have a front-loading NES. And this composite video jack is what they're calling a multi-function jack. It allows you to use either composite video out or stereo audio out. So I'm really interested in these new boards. I have an NES RGB 4.0 ready to go. I'm just waiting for hopefully getting a clear NES shell to put all this in. But I have my OpenTendo build and I have the NES RGB 4.0 already. This was kind of the missing piece for me to start on this new build. If you're interested in purchasing one of these new boards, Merlin Shaw sometimes releases them on eBay for sale. So you can always check out the GitHub. He has two links at the very top for his eBay pages if you're interested in getting one of these replacement NES power boards. Next, we have an interesting project from Jay, aka No Sauce Guy on Twitter. They've designed this embedded rumble motor mod for the Game Boy Advance. So if you look at the pictures here, this is a flex cable thing that I believe this solders over the Game Boy Advance cartridge pins here at the bottom. You can see a good picture overlaid on top of it here. But the other thing I'm not seeing from this photo is the actual rumble motor. I'm assuming it's something that you wire externally. I'm not really sure where that would end up on a Game Boy Advance because the Game Boy Advance shell is kind of compact and everything's kind of, there's not a lot of space to fit anything. So I kind of wish these photos had a finished build with everything all together there. But it looks like an interesting mod. It works by sniffing the cart bus for rumble signals in both a Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color games that have compatibility with Rumble. I thought this was a pretty simple and interesting looking project. It doesn't really look that hard to install inside of a Game Boy Advance, and I think it might add some good functionality to the Game Boy Advance. Next, we have a post from Humble Bazooka. This is a shell design for the Famicom RGB Blaster from Crix. So I think we already saw one of these from Jeff Chen, just kind of a shell that goes around the RGB Blaster. I think you actually do have to disassemble it to put this together. But Humble Bazooka makes use of his Bamboo Labs 3D printer with the multi-material attachment, the AMS or whatever, to have two different colors for the shell. So in the console, I mean, it looks amazing. Other than the fact that you now have this huge tower of power sticking out of your Famicom, I think the shells are a good idea to kind of lessen the tolerance so you're not having anything wobbling back and forth. I don't actually have an RGB blaster. I probably should have ordered one, but anything you could do to protect your expensive electronics I think is a pretty good idea. I do see a slot on the side here. I wish I had an RGB blaster to actually look at it. Is he maybe planning to add a port to the side somehow? I'm not sure, and there's no news about additional features or pricing or availability or anything, so we're just gonna have to wait for a Humble Bazooka to kind of decide what they want to do with this. Next, we have an interesting conversation that occurred on Twitter that I just kind of stumbled upon. Nan Tamario is talking about using a Tang Nano 20K, which is an FPGA by Sipeed, I guess, to support this NES Tang project, which itself sounds pretty cool. I'll have to look into that in the future. So in the initial post, it looks like they're able to create a NES core for this Tang Nano 20K FPGA board. This Jeremy Wolf responded asking if SNES is possible using that 20K board. Is that the highest current Tang Nano that's available, the 20K? The number 20K, I think, refers to the number of LUTs or lookup tables that are possible in these FPGAs. I'm not too familiar with that, but I think I understand that bigger the number, the more stuff that you can fit on it. So Nan Tamario responded, resource-wise, Super Nintendo is very tight. Most 8-bit machines are easy to fit, but then, 16-bit and onwards, who knows? But then the actual Sipeed Twitter account asked how many LUTs a Super Nintendo would need. We're choosing from 25K, 60K, and 138K. I think they're talking about new projects that they're working on, so they're seeing how big of an FPGA, how many LUTs they can fit into the next Sipeed Tang version. Nan Tamario responded with a spreadsheet of the LUTs that Mr. Cores used, so it looks like Super Nintendo is 32K. Sipeed responded by saying that they're going to be working on the highest LUT version first, so that's 138K LUTs in this new Sipeed Tang board. And it has a 2x800 megahertz RISC-V hardcore inside of it. But this board will be less than $100. And good old CO is here to make a bold claim that if they put this amount of LUTs on a board and then using HPS, I'm not sure what that is, he'll migrate, Mister or something from the DE10 Nano to that board. I hope that was an interesting meander through this Twitter post. I think it's sort of interesting how these companies like Sipeed with the Tang boards, they seem to want to be involved with the community to develop FPGA systems that developers actually want to use. I mean, think about that with Intel. I guess it would be Terasic is the company that makes the DE10 Nano. When's the last time you heard Terasic ask the Mr. community what they wanted in an FPGA? I mean, I'm not biased or anything. I'm just interested in new projects. And it looks like Sipeed is interested in asking what the community needs for FPGAs. Now, a week goes by that I don't have some new news from X-Rider. This is the DeltaStation, which is based off of the Pico Station, which is an ODE for the PlayStation 1 that uses the Raspberry Pi Pico. I think last week or maybe the week before we talked about them working with Rama to develop a new version of the X Station. Now this is a Pico Station. It kind of makes sense. I feel like if you were a developer developing a mods for a particular system and you kind of had two parallel projects that you could work with, it would probably be easier for you to work on both at the same time, especially if you're like laying out a board or something. Anyways, pretty cool project, sort of similar to the X Station one. I'm assuming that this also has some kind of a QSB. Oh yeah, here it is. Maybe this is the same one from the X Station, but interesting progress, and it's exciting that it's actually booting now. Speaking of X-Rider, they developed a NeoGeo QuadBios MVS board. Wow, X-Rider is just working on a ton of projects at the same time, huh? So this is one of those boards designed to go onto a NeoGeo arcade board that lets you put like a UniBIOS or some other type of BIOS onto the arcade board. I don't know, it kind of like clips over the chip. I don't really know what it's called. I just know that it goes over it and it kind of replaces the BIOS with a different one. But this one, it looks like there are 4 BIOSes together, like you can swap back and forth between them. So there's the UniBIOS 4.0, which is what I am used to using. I've got one of those in my OpenMVS. There's the Diag BIOS, I'm not really sure what that is. There's the Debug BIOS, and then there's a BIOS Origin Japan. And here are the installation instructions. These installation instructions look exactly like the one that I did. I can't remember the company that makes the one that I have. It's Red. I can't remember, and I've looked through my email and I can't find the email. Anyways, this is also open source, so if you want to put together all the parts and flash the EEPROM there, you can have your own NeoGeo QuadBios for the NeoGeo MVS. Next, we have a project that I've kind of zoned out of a lot because I have no idea what the heck a game.com is. But I know who Zwenergy is. They were one of the developers behind the GBA HD project, which is a consoleizer for the Game Boy Advance. Anyways, for the past few weeks, they've been mentioning that they're working on a game.com flash cart. I don't even know how many games there are. Let's look it up. Please don't literally go to game.com. Okay, good old Wikipedia. So the game.com is a 5th generation handheld. What's 5th generation? Sony PlayStation, N64. Okay, so it was around the PlayStation 1, N64 era. Released by Tiger Electronics. Okay, that makes more sense. The first version of the Game.com came connected to the 14.4 kilobit per second modem, hence its name referencing the top-level domain .com. Wow, that is incredible marketing. It was the first video game console to include a touchscreen and the first handheld console to include internet connectivity. The Game.com sold fewer than 300,000 units and was discontinued in 2000 because of poor sales. So about 3 years lifespan. The more you know. Okay, so now we know it's a relatively rare handheld made by Tiger Electronics that had some internet connectivity. So I can imagine just getting a unit is pretty expensive, let alone having any games for it. So I guess that makes sense why we would want a flash cart for the Game.com. So Zwenergy has released the Gerber files and schematics to create your own Game.com flash cart if you want to, available on that GitHub. And it looks like there is a companion flasher shield. Maybe you need that to flash new ROMs onto it or something. So maybe it has another kind of connector or whatever that you can plug this flasher into and flash the games onto it. So I did the bad thing a while ago and I ordered one of those IntecGaming Game Boy Advance Consolizer kit things. My plan was to create a video around this, but I don't think I'm ever going to. I mean, I have most of the install stuff, instructions filmed and edited already. I just didn't really know how to handle the review of it because I don't really think this is that great. But anyways, that was, I don't know, sometime last year, probably 6 or 9 months ago that I got this and put it together and everything. But I'm just now getting an email from IntecGaming because this was supposed to come with a special gift and they didn't ship it at the same time. Although I don't really know what other kind of special gift that they could send because they already sent one of those boards that changes the Game Boy Advance shell into a Super Nintendo controller. So I thought that was the gift. But apparently there's another gift. I don't know when it's coming. I already submitted all my info. So as soon as I know more information, I'll let everyone know what this IntecGaming gift really was. Mandatory RetroScaler / Bitfunks warning. If you don't like RetroScaler, just skip ahead to the next chapter. Okay, so I talked a few weeks ago about this interesting Sega Saturn flash cart called the SAROO. It's an open source project, so all the Gerbers and everything should be available for you to build your own. And CEO did that and looked into it a little bit. And he came to the conclusion that it would be pretty hard for somebody from North America to try to source all of the parts that they use to build this. I saw somebody mention something about RetroScaler. I'm not exactly sure where that original post went to. However, if you go to the SAROO GitHub page, which has the information about the actual project, and you go into the GitHub issues page, RetroScaler is saying that they are very interested in this project and they want to cooperate with the developer of the SAROO. While there's not really much here to this conversation, it would be kind of interesting if RetroScaler actually was able to produce the SAROO kits if the developers wanted them to. I think one of the downsides to open source hardware as it relates to sourcing of components, usually whoever the developer is kind of sources as locally as they can to themselves for as cheap as they can. I mean, sometimes we go to different countries and things for parts that they're cheaper, but if you're deep into developing a project and you need a very specific part that might be kind of difficult to acquire for other people to acquire, then that might as well kill your project for somebody in a different part of the country or different part of the world that can't source that part. But RetroScaler or Bitfunks, they must have a pretty large reach as far as being able to source components and things. I'd be very interested and also still skeptical because I'm skeptical of RetroScaler as a company, but it would be kind of interesting if they were able to release a few of these or a run of these or whatever for people who actually wanted this Sega Saturn flash cart to actually acquire one. One, without having to build it themselves, but two, without running into sourcing issues. So we'll see how this goes, and it's sort of interesting to see RetroScaler actually reaching out to people instead of just ripping them off and just selling products without communicating with the original developers. Next, we have another interesting application of using a trimmed Wii motherboard. I'm currently working on building an Ashida, I don't know how to pronounce it, which is a portable GameCube because the Wii can run GameCube games and it's kind of limited in running Wii games in handheld form. But in order to make an Ashida, you have to kind of butcher a real Wii motherboard and cut it down really small. But then that's really just for handheld purposes. It's not necessarily useful for making it a console again. Until I saw this other project called, they're calling it the GC Micro HDMI edition. But this is a project developed by Wesk, which is the same person that developed the Ashida mod. You can see these pictures here on BitBuilt, so it looks pretty tiny. I mean, I know the size of a cut down Wii board. Actually, okay, this is a secret. Don't tell anyone. This is about the size of a cut down Wii board. So here's my iPhone for scale. So it, you know, an iPhone could eclipse the Wii board that's been cut down. And then it looks like there was a custom made 3D printed enclosure, which is kind of interesting. But then there's just so many questions, right? So first, there's USB ports on the front, which makes sense because the Wii itself has USB ports, and that's one of the major ways of hacking a Wii is to use the USB ports. So that makes sense. But then the controller ports look like they're like 1/4-inch aux ports. And you can see kind of like a breakout cable here, which is really bizarre. It goes to that aux looking port to a GameCube male port, so you could plug a GameCube controller into it. So here's some interesting photos of the inside. It looks like there is a breakout board for the GameCube controller ports in the front and probably the USB ports as well. There is the trimmed Wii motherboard in the middle, so it looks like it's even smaller than mine. And I know there's some fancy things that you can do with like a NAND replacement, or like you can move the NAND somewhere using a different board and make a really tiny, really compact Wii trim. But the HDMI part of this, so it's HDMI output, the HDMI part is using one of these Electron Shepherd AVE Wii chips. I think it was using the older version of that mod, which was just called the AVE HDMI. I think that was back before they released the new version that worked on any version of the Wii. So I think that's kind of an interesting application of this whole trimmed down Wii board, is just making a really tiny GameCube. I mean, it's totally impractical because a GameCube is already not that big. If you want to flex your modding muscles, or maybe you just want to have something cool, or maybe you're just trying to play Smash Brothers Melee and you need to like sneak it in. Like maybe you're going to a concert and you want to go into like the back room of a concert and you're trying to smuggle in a GameCube. So you like have the GameCube in your pocket and then like a controller in your other pocket. Somehow you get past all the security. Okay, I'm taking this too far, but I think this is really interesting. I don't think there's any other explanation about if the additional boards are going to be available for sale or open source or anything. But I honestly think even though the trim part looks really scary, the other parts, the assembly of everything else and where the wires go, might actually be easier in this because it's so open and how spread apart things are than with the Ashida or like a Wii handheld. So this might be cool if you're interested in Wii trimming, maybe not if you're not. And with the addition of that NAND replacement sort of like sideways board thing, it's this black board here, might make it more difficult than just a normal trim. So really awesome project from Wesk. Before we get to the big story, I want to thank the sponsor of this week's video, PCBWay. If you're looking to dive deeper into the retro modding hobby, then you're going to have to learn how to produce your own custom PCBs. PCBWay is a custom PCB manufacturer that makes it really easy for you to order your own custom PCBs. All you have to do is upload the Gerber files for the project that you're trying to work on, and they'll produce the actual PCB parts and send it to you in the mail. They also have 3D printing services, so if you don't have your own 3D printer or you want to make something fancy like a transparent resin print, then they've got you covered. And if you're a mod creator, they have CNC and injection molding services to help you create a more professional looking product. Thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. You can find out more by visiting the link in the video description. For the big story this week, we have a really awesome announcement from RetroFighters. RetroFighters makes aftermarket controllers for a bunch of different consoles. I have the Brawler 64, which is a controller for the N64. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this controller. Part of me doesn't like it because it's not the same shape of the original N64 controller. The other part, I don't really think it's the highest of quality as far as the buttons and the D-pad and everything, but it's wireless and it works if you want a wireless N64 controller. They recently opened pre-orders for a wireless controller for the original Xbox. Now, if you know anything about controllers for the original Xbox, most of the ones that I've seen, if not all of the ones recently that you see for the Xbox or compatible with an Xbox, only are wired, because I don't think Microsoft wants to release, I don't know if they have some proprietary wireless technology or something, but that's why you don't see aftermarket wireless Xbox controllers really that much. But this RetroFighters controller, the Hunter gamepad, is wireless. I think it uses 2.4 gigahertz. I think how they get around it is they actually use an external dongle. So it's not like a Bluetooth that's integrated into the original Xbox. Original Xbox didn't have Bluetooth or any wireless connectivity. So they're just using an external dongle to connect to it. So that's kind of their hack around Microsoft's kind of annoying wireless stuff. Okay, let's actually look at some photos. I'm going to use the Stone Age Gamer website, but pre-orders are open on both Stone Age Gamer and also Castlemania, so pick whichever one you like the best. I'm not going to leave any affiliate links to pre-ordering this thing at all because I've never used it, so I really don't like recommending products that I've never used and I can't like stand behind. But let's look at the photos anyways. So it looks like it has interesting like Xbox One or Xbox Series style thumbsticks with those weird bumps in the top there. There's a start and select button in the middle, as well as a third button. I don't really know what that's for, but you can also see that there are white and black buttons where they're supposed to be, which is really exciting for a lot of people who are fans of the original Xbox, myself included. I played a lot of Halo. Anyway, so the black and white buttons go below the other buttons. Usually controllers, if you get them working wirelessly with an OG Xbox, you have to use the bumpers usually for black and white, but not with this controller. It has dedicated white and black buttons. And as far as I know, you can get it in either green or black right now. I'm not sure if there's gonna be other colors coming soon. Oh, one last thing. It uses Hall effect sensors too, instead of potentiometers in the thumbsticks. So hopefully we won't be bothered with something like drift in the future. That kind of adds to the premium quality of this controller. Not to mention, I think that it is more expensive than any other controller that they've released. There was a PlayStation 1 that they released kind of recently also, which I also pre-ordered that. So I'd be interested to see what these newer RetroFighters controllers are like, because that N64 one that I've had is pretty old at this point, a couple of years old. They've released it. I'd be interested to see if there's a quality difference between the new RetroFighters controllers and the older ones. That's it for this week, but check out this video if you want to see an N64 HDMI mod using a Raspberry Pi Pico. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.